Welcome to BWI Live. I'm Thomas Frank Carr. A very cold, very different show today. We're going to get to a lot of different things on today's show, but as you may notice, it's just me right now, and that is actually intentional. I don't know that we have any issues with internet today with our regulars who are here, Sean Fitz and Nate Bauer. What we do have is an interesting set of circumstances. The first off is because it is so cold, there's a 2-hour delay. So Nate is being a dad right now and will join us at some point during the show. I haven't heard from him, so I don't know when, but he will be here. And we'll be talking about Penn State's defensive coordinator search, the latest on that, what you need to know from that perspective. We'll have the conversation breaking down the big picture and some of the details that we know that are out there, including Penn State pursuing Danton Lynn getting a contract extension from USC, all that stuff. Also, we're going to be getting to a little bit of recruiting. Fitz is also not here because he is still a part of the Walking Dead. He's recovering from whatever he got at the Orange Bowl in Florida. So what we're going to do to start the show is we're going to have a conversation about the national championship game last night from the Penn State perspective. And then we're going to get into 2025 fully. You know, over at bluewhiteillustrated.com, I've been writing a series of articles on looking at the roster right now. Where are the positions where there are battles? Where can we identify roles that will open up for the team in winter conditioning and spring football? Because competition starts immediately. It doesn't start in training camp. It doesn't start in spring practice. It starts in the weight room, and it starts in the meeting room in the off season. It's a cumulative thing. And as we sit here right now with the roster the way it is, we can start to identify where those places are and some of the players that are involved in those competitions. So if you want the full thing, bluewhiteillustrated.com is where you can go to find that those articles, and you can join if you haven't yet for just $1. $1 for a week, and then you can get access to the site for a full year after that if you decide to join us. But we've got great reporting over there on Junior Days, which are coming up. We'll be previewing that in full later on the Thursday show, which is our recruiting show, and I am happy to say that we are back to a regular rhythm, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, with our wrestling show Wednesday evenings as well. So all that great stuff coming up this week. And coming up right now, Fitz is back. Fitz, welcome to the show. How you doing?
I make no promises about being back. I am here, present, very, very brief in terms of my rants this week. So we'll have to work between the spaces and everything like that. But happy to be back. Sorry I missed last week. Was not a great week in the household in terms of illness. But hey, we're back and we're moving forward.
Well, you sound a lot better than you were underselling it. You sound a lot better, and I think it's a good thing you have a great microphone because the bass is still there, and that's what we need from you today.
It's sultry, like Phoebe from Friends when she got sick. No, I mean it was tough. But the cough button is going to be very helpful today. I'll say that. So when you come back to me and I'm on mute, that's why.
Perfect. Well, I can do a lot of filibustering. I have a lot of thoughts about the college football national championship last night and watching Notre Dame in that situation. Having seen those two teams this year, it was fairly predictable the way that game played out. I guess the first thing that I notice when you go into a situation like these things and you have one team that runs their quarterback 9 times on the opening drive, that's throwing the kitchen sink to get a touchdown in the first quarter. And my opinion on this has always been, if you are spamming the quarterback run, it's because you're compensating for something else that you don't have, like a drop back passing game. I give Notre Dame credit for being in that game as much as they were, given the injuries that they had sustained throughout the playoff run and being as competitive as they were. But it's hard to sit here on this side of the glass as a Penn State observer and not think Penn State would have been more competitive in that game with a pass rush, a healthy offensive line. And obviously the thing that they missed in that game that Ohio State pointed out very obviously is that if you have a good receiver, you can take advantage of that man coverage that they like to play. And if you force them to do something other than play man coverage, they don't have a lot of answers on defense, which is what, the preview of that game was all about between Penn State and Notre Dame, and Ohio State just made it painfully obvious in the next game. So I guess those were my thoughts watching the game, especially in the first half, where you could see the seeds of the blowout from after the first drive on. What were your thoughts generally?
When you look at sometimes the game plan is run right at the best player, which Notre Dame's best players are not their corners, but they do really, they man up, they go after it, whatever. So you saw that on the game, essentially the game-winning play, Jeremiah Smith. They went right at Christian Gray. I mean, he ran straight at Christian Gray. There's tremendous coaching going on there in terms of like finding the angle and finding the most awkward angle and making that person react and move. And then he ran right by him. It's like, that's the difference right there. But yeah, I agree with you about the quarterback running game. I mean, Notre Dame throwing it back to most of their national championships, which were pre-World War II. I mean, it was kind of single wing type, and it's a heroic performance until it's not, and then you see the limitations, and you saw basically two different sports for about 2 quarters there. So it was basically what I expected. I saw both those teams in person, and I came away thinking Ohio State, if they're clicking, or if they're not, just superiorly talented, superiorly healthy, like that's a good Notre Dame team, and that's an unfortunate breakdown down the stretch in terms of injuries, because that's a heck of a football team, but at the same time you saw the difference there.
What's the difference having seen Ohio State in the playoff and having seen them in Happy Valley? Because it seems like 2 things. They figured out the offensive line to the point it was not an alarming weakness for them, and I know that's everything from the Penn State perspective. You're going to get the pushback of, well, they dominated Penn State in the 4th quarter and ended the game on like an 8-minute drive or whatever it was. But generally, their weakness was the fact that against Michigan, they could not run the football, and they seemed determined to run the football. Was it just that they were getting Jeremiah Smith involved more often and more frequently in the playoff, or was there something, I guess, what do you view the change of the way they ended the season and the way they ran over everybody in the playoff?
Well, we kind of saw the same thing with Penn State, was that offensive line. The more that you play together, the more that you play in different weather, the more that you play in different scenarios, you get better. And I think of the Rose Bowl team a couple of years ago at Penn State. You think of that offensive line, it's just patchwork by the end, but they're playing pretty well because they're playing together. Yeah. And you saw that. I mean, Luke Montgomery got his second start last night. When you patch those guys in there and they've got talent, you can get the most out of them. And so I think that's kind of what we saw. And plus, when you've got threats everywhere, like when you're playing 11 on 11 instead of 9 versus 11, kind of changes the math a little bit. So Notre Dame, I think, was running scared is not an accurate portrayal of how that was going, but wary of everyone makes a difference. And then all of a sudden, Will Howard, I think I was talking to some buddies that have player props in their states in FanDuel, and I think his over under rushing was like 12.5. I was like, hammer that, because he's going to run a lot. And as you saw with both offenses, you want to get what you can get, and then just get to the next play, get to the next first down. And I think that the quarterback run was so vital for those guys. And, Will Howard, not the most supremely talented guy in the country, but he's a national champ for a reason. He made the plays and he came through, and is a really good college quarterback. Yeah.
And that part there about being a really good college quarterback, the transfer portal quarterbacks that have been successful on, elite teams going after, I'd say, mid-range good college quarterbacks, maybe guys that aren't going to the NFL or aren't going to be serious contenders to be drafted highly. That middle ground has been really good for a lot of college football teams that want to make a run, where you have a 5th, 6th year quarterback that just understands football. You surround him with a lot of great talent, and suddenly that guy, as a facilitator, and it's funny, you can call Will Howard a game manager because he just, he's not making supreme throws, but he's making the right reads, the right decisions, throwing to Jeremiah Smith at the right time, who's open. And again, this all sounds like we're mitigating what he did last night, where he had some really good throws. At the same time, at Kansas State, it's different. The talent around him, all those things. It's just that part. And this is kind of just generally spinning into a different thought of the number of players staying in college football, and with Penn State, the number of players staying on Penn State's roster is going to make for a better product for Penn State and for college football next year. This is what I think the NBA wanted with their draft rules of a more mature league, less guys figuring it out in the pros, and then more ready-made products coming in from college football. And it's going to make college football better, more competent veteran players, instead of shoving freshmen on the field all the time and having them, you see the growing process in football happening in front of your eyes. You're going to see more of these situations unfold in the future as NIL becomes more of a thing for college football in terms of the proliferation throughout, not just the top 5 teams.
Yeah, it's more NFL. I mean, in terms of the parity, in terms of how many teams can win. You and I both, fortunate fan bases that, have not been tortured at all, still have teams left in the NBA or in the NFL playoffs. But with NIL, you even the playing field to an extent. Ohio State, probably the most expensive roster, probably the most talented roster. And you saw what the fruits of that labor were. They legally bought a championship, and that's not a criticism. That's a portrayal of today.
Yeah.
It's something that you look at. Where do the margins come in? Where's the value here? Notre Dame, not as talented, not as deep, injured down the stretch, and all that stuff is going to add up. And you're going to see that for about 8 teams in that college football playoff. That's kind of what happened to them. So, it's a proliferation of the league, or like the college football game in general. But I think a lot of things came closer together. A lot of things got sort of muddied up. And I think it was awesome. Like, I think it was a wonderful college football season. So I'm all for that. When you're not Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, when you're not on the top, that's appealing. That's enticing. And for us covering Penn State, you saw Penn State get to a Final Four, not because of it, but in large part because anybody could have won that one this year. And we'll see. I'm very curious what a second Penn State Ohio State matchup would have been. I said it coming in, and Notre Dame had those late scores and made it more of a game than it was for a long stretch of that. But the familiarity that you have with Ohio State and Penn State probably keeps that score a little bit down a little bit. And you never know what's going to happen. So I feel that Ohio State would have beaten anybody, but I don't feel that Ohio State would have beaten Penn State by 40. I think it was 31-7 or something like that last night.
That was the part where I think I feel confident in Penn State's adjustments, especially on the offensive side of the ball and the way they're able to run the ball late in the year, that they would have had a better plan this time around for the Ohio State defense. I believe that Andy Kolnicki's the kind of guy that learns from his mistakes and learns from failures and losses and things like that. I don't think that Penn State would have won that game, but I think it might have been a more competitive game. But then from everybody else's perspective, they would have just seen Penn State lose to Ohio State again from like the national perspective. So that's, I think, the narrative you would have gotten in that other future. Now, I was planning on doing something here on the show in terms of having our top 5 position battles for 2025 by myself, because I didn't know with the health and injury status of everyone around me if we were going to do that as a team or as a solo act. So we might get to that in a second. We might pivot away from that. But what we are doing right now is bringing on Nate Bauer, Blue White Illustrated senior editor. He is here. We got the band back together. So, guys, I'm going to talk about our favorite thing, which is having a beer at Anti-Fragile. Nate, you are joining the show right now. I'm throwing it right to you. You're going in the deep end. Tell me about Anti-Fragile and why you like that place so much.
It's great. They have really great beer and the people are friendly. And then there's cheesesteaks outside. So that trio of quality is unmatched in State College, and it's something that we really love. Brewed locally, in-house, on-site. This is for our money, and I do think that this is an important clarification. We pay for our beer when we go there. Right. We are not shilling for them out of simply the financial arrangement here. Like, we actually use this stuff and we love it. It is always a great variety of beer, fresh, delicious. I mean, look at it. Look at that right there.
Can I just say, actually, the reason that they're a sponsor here,
that's not beer there. But anyway, yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say the reason that they're a sponsor of the show is because these two guys went there all the time, and I was saying, hey, do we know of anybody who'd be interested in sponsoring the show? And Fitz said, yeah, you should just go to Anti-Fragile because they're awesome. And then I went down there and I listened to people when they speak. I met John. I went and I had some of their stuff, and it is legitimately one of the best places. I'm a big atmosphere guy. It's not just enough that you brew good beer. You got to have a good vibe. And it's exactly the place that I like to go and have conversations with friends, have a good beer. And it's not just about kicking back 7 or 8 or 9. It's about the experience you have while doing it. And the staff is awesome. The atmosphere, I love the upstairs, like the loft area. You can go sit on some nice leather couches, have your own little environment to hang out and talk. And of course, then, they've got to back it up with the beer, which they knock it out of the park because they brew their own stuff in-house. doing things the right way doesn't mean it's easy or the most profitable way, but they do it the right way at Anti-Fragile. So we always appreciate them because I feel like that's what we do here. We try to do things the right way. We try to do things not with shortcuts, but doing a good job both here and at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. So I like it when sponsors really fit what we do, and they are absolutely part of that.
In a great beer state on the Untapped rankings, Anti-Fragile number 7 among Pennsylvania breweries, which is pretty darn impressive when you think about all the great beer that gets made in Pennsylvania. We got it right here in State College, and again, it's the rankings speak for themselves. We don't have to fluff them up too much yet. It's pretty great stuff.
So let's get to the thing that everyone wants to know about. The reason Nate and Fitz are the best at what they do is because they get you the stuff that matters, the information about the events going on for Penn State football. And the latest one is the defensive coordinator search after Tom Allen about a week ago officially accepted the position at Clemson. And so James Franklin has been spending that amount of time trying to find the next defensive coordinator for the Nittany Lions, the third in 4 years. And so, Nate, I know that at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, there's all the information, like everything you need to know.
Yep.
So the problem I have in this situation is I don't want to ask you a question that is going to lead you down a road to saying the things that our subscribers pay for. At the same time, like there's a lot of stuff that's out there. Danton Lynn, openly courted by Penn State, got a contract extension because of it from USC, or at least that is the inference that I have from what I've seen. Yep. What's the timeline? What's the storyline here? Penn State's defensive coordinator search, as you've been covering it since the last time you and I talked a week ago.
Dan Lynn, not just an extension, a significant pay raise. That's the key to that conversation. Look, James Franklin is a thorough guy when it comes to the operation of his football program. And I'm not going to say that there's no rush, but he's not going to change that direction and that trajectory. Right? That's just how he handles these things. And I think that the key for people to know I'm flat out. If you are not a subscriber to us, you should be. And now is a great opportunity to join. It's $1. Come check us out for 7 days. All the best stuff I am going to continue to reserve for that space on the message board, not only because it's the right thing to do, but because it's a sensitive subject, right? Like these are it is a constantly evolving wheel, right? Where guys are available and interested, and guys are not available and interested, and available and not interested, right? Like you name it. Any of that combination is constantly shifting. And so it's a timing thing. Timing is a huge part of this. Timing was a huge part of Manny Diaz coming to Penn State, right? Timing was a huge part of Tom Allen coming to Penn State. And so once again, Penn State and James Franklin are in this situation where it is about finding the right candidate, finding the right candidates, I would say, vetting them and getting to know how they would fit. I think that it's an important public conversation that James Franklin had at one point in the aftermath of Tom Allen's hiring, talking about what that process actually was. Tom Allen came to Penn State for days, right? And I think people have this perception that it's a 30-minute Zoom, like a normal job hiring process. It's not. It is intensive. It is talking ball, figuring out how you fit with the rest of the coaching staff. Because I will say, if it's not Anthony Poindexter, and he is a possibility, if it's not him, there is going to be another situation where most of, if not all of the staff is retained. And so that's a unique thing to Penn State, where it's important to James Franklin to have a defensive coordinator that can slide in and be comfortable with the rest of the guys that are on that staff.
From a personality perspective and from a tactical perspective. So those are the two. I think that's the important thing of it's not just the X's and O's. That part might even be the easiest part. It's about making sure the fit is what you need and what you want. The other thing I'm interested in, Tom Allen was pitched as a guy who could potentially, and this is, I think a common thought of a guy who was a head coach that didn't necessarily have aspirations to reattain that position later in his career, that he might have been a guy that stays around for a while as the defense coordinator. Fast forward a year, that was absolutely not what happens. Is that a consideration at any point that preferably, given your druthers, you could find a guy who wanted to be a defense coordinator and that's the aspiration level? Or is it simply the best possible candidate to do the best possible job, and then we'll find out what happens on the other side?
Yeah, I got the 2-year rule here. It's like you have a coordinator, you expect them for 2 years. Well, Tom Allen came up a year short. It's going to average out to be about 2 years. When you start hiring to keep somebody here for 5 years, that's more complacency than anything. That's more familiarity than anything. And familiarity is great, but also you're limiting yourself in terms of the potential of a guy that's got a rocket strapped to his back.
Yeah.
Manny was not that guy, but Manny turned himself into that guy by being the coordinator that he was. Tom, I think there's more family stuff at play here than I guess it was original. I was laying in this bed here all week. I didn't catch the day-to-day, the hour-to-hour stuff, but there's more family stuff at play there. So there's outside influences for a guy that doesn't have particular connections to James Franklin, to Central Pennsylvania, all that stuff. So it definitely makes sense in that manner. Now you got to find a guy with a balance of both of those that is still on the ascent. Like, you're not hiring a guy to be here for 10, 15 years like it used to be.
Yeah.
Tom Bradley was a fantastic defensive coordinator at Penn State. They're not looking for Tom Bradley. They're looking for a guy that can, elevate them and leave it in a better place when he goes to get a head coaching job. I mean, that's kind of the crux of college football right now. That's not just a Penn State thing anymore. So I think that you limit your candidate pool by several things here, right? You're talking about a guy that needs to go out and have some sort of connection to the Northeast for recruiting, for feel, for coaching in bad weather type stuff. Like those are natural connections here. You need to find a guy that can fit with your staff, that's not bringing his own guys in, because the guys that you have are rock stars. Terry Smith, Anthony Poindexter, Deion Barnes, Dan Connor. Like you want your piece to fit with the pieces that you already have. And that's an extremely tough ask. I mean, I look at, when years ago when Washington hired Jim Zorn, they hired coordinators before they hired a head coach. Like, that doesn't really work in a situation to make it appealing for a new head coach to come in and say, this is who you're going to work with. But you can still find the right guy. You can still find a guy like Manny that comes in and brings a couple of his guys from Miami as analysts, or as whatever you want to call them these days. Because with the not unlimited, but with the expansion of college coaching staffs, stuff doesn't matter as much anymore. You're not going to take it's not like if you take Al Golden, you have to take Mark D'Onofrio. Like that's how it used to be. It's not the case anymore. So you open yourself up to that, but there's still parameters that you have to work with, because it is Penn State, because of where Penn State is, because of how James Franklin is, I guess how he is to work for, and all this, like all these things are going to cut down on the pool, but also eventually find you the right guy. As we've seen, Penn State's defense.
But that's what you want too. Yeah. You want to have a selective pool. You don't want to be going after somebody who's good enough. Like, if this is a team that has national championship aspirations and wants to be among the best of the best, they have to be choosy and selective. They have to go find the best possible candidate, which might take some time. And so, Nate, this is the conversation that I think is most important now, in terms of not what we do know in the story that has happened so far, but the what is next is what everybody wants to know. I know you don't know the future, but reading the temperature, I mean, I don't want to sell you short on anything, Nate.
I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
What is the timeline in your mind in terms of not what you know for certain, but generally, like, I would expect it to be X date or X more days or whatever. What are you ballparking for when we're doing a breaking news video here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel talking about blank as the next defensive coordinator for Penn State?
Yeah, this is an honest answer. I don't know. And the reason I don't know is because it's constantly changing. Last week, I would have said by today. Honestly, but last last Wednesday, I would have felt relatively comfortable with the notion that if not this, then that. Right. And that has evolved. And so I am not in a position to necessarily say the why, right, behind all of the decisions that are made. It's simply a matter of shedding light and insight into the what, the who, right, who's in it, who has been considered, who hasn't. All of those different things have changed and rotated through the course of this process. And so do I think it's, I don't know about coming to a close, but is there an opportunity in the near future? Sure. But also I wouldn't, I don't know. Like, I've been doing this long enough to see and be cognizant that when you step out on a ledge to say, oh, it looks like this is done, that's not what happens.
Yeah.
That's not what happens. It just doesn't work that way. And it's opinions change, and you name it. Like, anybody who has conducted a hire in the outside world, who has been in a position where they can hire somebody for employment, I'm sure there are plenty of roles and places in the world where it's as simple as XYZ. You met the criteria, you're hired. Yeah. This is not that. This is not that. There are this whole host of factors that go into it, and you got to figure it out from there.
So last question here, and I think that unless there's anything else you guys want to add, we'll move on. You mentioned timing being incredibly important, and the fact that Manny Diaz was available because he was hired and because he fit so well. Tom Allen fired and fit so well. And I still think last year, despite some of the differences in what I expected and what he did, was still a good fit for Penn State. The defense gave the offense the ball back in 2 losses with time for the offense to go score. So while it was not dominant like Manny Diaz's teams, the 2023 specifically, they were still a good defense with a lot of great pieces. That aside, that whole aside, the timing of the situation this year, would you say it is not as ideal because the candidate has not presented themselves just yet? Or are there other things at play, which we're getting to at bluewhiteillustrated.com?
I think it's not ideal in the way that the transfer portal was not ideal, that the way that all of the stuff, the rhythms of college football, where everybody else, aside from 12 teams, and obviously that was a little bit different this year with the expansion, but everybody else moved on to 2025 in November. Realistically, right? Andy Kolnicki turned down that job. That conversation was in December, right? The beginning of December, the first weekend in December. So it's not ideal in the sense that so much movement has already happened that the ask of pulling someone away from a recently signed contract is too big of a cross to bear in a lot of cases, right? It precludes your hiring pool. It limits it. It cuts it off a little bit in terms of who is available and who's not. And I think some people that may have otherwise been interested and found a fit and thought that it would have been a good situation. It's not as though they jumped the gun, but when you don't know that this job was going to be open, you can't really wait on that, right? You can't preclude yourself from being part of the jobs that you take. So I do think it's again, I mean, timing is a huge thing, and it definitely is in this case.
Yeah, and that's something I think JC Corrigan asked earlier also, in the chat.
Can I add something here? Just that
sure.
I think is really important. Tom Allen's really good as a defensive coordinator. Brent Pry was really good as a defensive coordinator. Manny Diaz is really good as James Franklin is a defensive priority coach.
Okay.
I'm going to let that hang there for a second. Sorry. I think it's a point that it is interesting that the guy who preaches explosive plays and turnovers and always explosive plays, I feel like come first, is a guy who also run game defense is how this team is pivoted in the last couple of years.
Yeah. I mean, he's got, it's the Joe formula. I'm not going to skirt around it. Like it's the same thing. Where I was thinking with this other stuff, and if we go back up in the chat a little bit, there's a comment that someone did not buy the Tom Allen for family reasons. Cyphered Carbon did not buy the Tom Allen for family reasons of leaving. I do. And I'll tell you why. Because, and we don't talk about this very much, the wives are so prominent here. The wives have been so prominent here. And honestly, when I talk about Penn State's struggles recruiting because of where Penn State is located, Penn State also struggles recruiting coordinators' wives because of where it's located. It happened last year before they hired Tom Allen with Danton Lynn. Like wives, not everybody loves State College. Bob Shoop's wife hated State College. Tom Allen's wife, I don't think particularly was fond of State College. Like this stuff is all, I don't want to call it window dressing, but it's all factors that come into play here. And I know you're going to say, all right, well, he makes $2 million. He can make the rules. I don't know what household you're living in, buddy, but it's a different scenario. And when you bring children, grandchildren into the factor, it changes some of the math for some people. And when you can get the same job-ish, Penn State defensive coordinator, Clemson defensive coordinator for the same amount of money, close to the grandkids.
Fans got mad about that.
Yeah. I mean, close to the grandkids, it's going to make a difference. So like the family stuff I buy, but it's not just, hey, I'm a great grandfather or I'm a wonderful grandfather and I want to be closer to my things. It's, hey, my wife who doesn't go to the office to draw up game plans for 18 hours a day wants to be around her babies and her babies' babies. Like that stuff matters. And it's going to lead to decisions like this. And it's, when we say it's everything, it's when you ask what the primary reason for leaving is, okay, you can say family stuff, but it's everything. And that draws it into it. And State College, for a person that hasn't been around State College and hasn't had connections to Central Pennsylvania, is a different atmosphere. So I think that a lot of that stuff comes into play. And that's kind of why we see some of this movement. And that's, those are the mitigating factors that, make this place a little bit tougher than Columbus or South Bend. Well, maybe not South Bend, but, some of those other places. Yeah.
Yeah. Nate, were you going to say something there? Looked like you were going to say something.
Yeah. I mean, I was just going to say it's with Tom Allen specifically, it's not about not liking State College. I have not been aware of them not liking State College. That's not the conversation. It's where are the daughters? And they're not here. They're in the Carolinas. And so that becomes the priority. I think if the daughters were in LA, right? Or if the daughter, it didn't matter if Austin, whatever, if the timing and place of where they were was the motivating factor here. Not liking State College. So.
Oh, this is a good one. The wives want a longer runway at the State College airport than more than Franklin. Yeah. This from Hero in the chat says, as a Penn State alum from Japan, it's tough. We missed the championship. Appreciate the amazing episodes. As always, next year could be our best shot. Hope for upgrades at defense coordinator and wide receiver to compete for a natty. Of course, we'll keep update of what's going on at bluewhiteillustrated.com. By the way, that's our first donation in yen. Is it yen, that Japanese currency? I think.
That would be something that I looked into before I said it on the air, but I'm pretty confident.
Yes, it is. So that is our first
man
donation
of the world
in yen. Thank you so much, Hero. Appreciate your comments and your compliments. And that is a great transition. Can
we parse one word in that in terms of upgrade for defensive coordinator? And I think that I've talked about this a bunch, is like Penn State fans so spoiled by the defense because it's been phenomenal for several years. It's like, you need somebody to carry that on. I don't necessarily, you didn't fire Tom Allen to find an upgrade. This wasn't Yursich to Kotelnicki to do that. I mean, I think you got to find the continuity, find the guy that can run the ship. The infrastructure for this defense is in place because of the way that they've prioritized athletes and the way that they've prioritized continuity with the staff and things like that. So it's about finding the captain. It's not necessarily about finding the shipbuilder, you know?
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Yeah, I think that's a fair point to make there. So we sit here with transfer portal. I don't know. I'm going to say it's closed. Enrollment has happened. Classes have started. There are no rules anymore, but at the same time, like, we look at the Penn State roster, and as far as I know, this is what we're working with. So the last week or so at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, I wrote a series of articles outlining not the players, but the positions that are up for grabs. That's the most important thing to me, is what are the roles that need a player as we look at the roster in 2025. And like I said to start the show, those competitions are starting as soon as winter lifting starts, not in spring football, not in training camp. It is a cumulative effort from, February, January, whenever the competition starts for those players. Maybe even it started last year in 2024, so you get a head start on all these things. We're going to count down the top 5 positions that are up for grabs for competition this year. I made the list. These guys are free to disagree and tell me what they think. And I did some things here that I'll explain my rationale, and then they can rip it apart. I think that'll be the fun way to do this with our top 5.
Number 5.
So number 5 is actually one of the few open positions here on the depth chart, and that is starting right guard, because Sal Wormley moved on to the NFL draft. I have it at number 5. First off, because I think whoever the answer is at right guard is going to be a very quality player, and there are a lot of options. And of course, the heir apparent, the person that everyone expects to take the job, is Cooper Cousins. Again, talking about the competition starting in 2024, a freshman that at this time last year, they were talking about, can he play center, which is just crazy to think of a freshman being able to do that. Playing guard this past season felt like they were preparing him for this eventuality. So it's number 5 because it is a starting position, but it feels like, there's so much depth that there's going to be a real competition. Cooper Cousins is going to be handed the role, and it's going to be a player that's either a veteran player in a JB Nelson or another depth young player on the offensive line ascending, or just straight up it's Cooper Cousins, however that plays out. So that's why I have it at number 5 instead of higher on the list as one of the most important positions on the offense that has to be filled as a starting role. Fitz, Nate, whoever wants to go first to give your thoughts on that particular choice. And I don't know if you want to give an alternate option, but go for it if you do.
Yeah, Penn State's got options here, and that's the thing I take away from it. You look at the depth and sort of swath of talent that Phil Trautwein has been able to develop and get ready and also play. Like, that's the key thing here. I saw a comment earlier in the chat, but when you play too many old guys, leave the back door open for your young guys to leave. And I think they've done a nice job of balancing that. Cousins is going to get every opportunity, I think, that he can, whether it's center, whether it's guard. Nick Dawkins has been around for several springs now. So how much does that rep count go down, and how much does it go up for Cousins, for Dom Ruley, for some of these other guys? Because when you're talking right guard, you're not exactly talking an exclusive right guard battle. And I know Venga's back at left guard, but you're talking about developing your 4 or 5 guy rotation for the interior offensive line. Now, obviously, you don't want to rotate a center, but at the same time, there's options there. Cousins, I think, is in prime territory to make a leap, but JB Nelson's a talented guy too when he's healthy. That's been the big hold up with JB. Donovan Harbor had a good freshman year. I don't think he's quite ready there, but you've got bodies that you're willing to throw it there. Remember, a couple of years ago, we couldn't play a blue-white game because of the numbers on the offensive line. So I feel confident in that you're going to get a guy that is going to be healthy enough to make an impact, but play a lot of football, even if he doesn't win the job, and keep these guys engaged. There's another spring portal window. It's going to be close, and it's going to be undetermined coming out of spring. Part of that is because these guys are close and good. The other part of that is because you want to keep these guys around. So I understand that it's a top priority to find a starting guard, but on the list of worries for Penn State next year, I'm not sure that it's all that high, but it's vital. It needs filled. Somebody made a comment about Donka in the chat. number one, you're not going to have him for the spring. Like that's a conversation we're going to have in August in terms of what do you do with your 3 or maybe 4 offensive tackles with Egan Boyer. That's another good problem to have, because you're going to play a lot of those guys and you're going to rotate them through. And I think of a fascinating thing that we learned this year, if you're going to play 16, 17 games, you're going to play a lot of guys and you're going to scale down reps during time in doubt, and you're going to play more of a rotation based look at a lot of positions. So I'm very excited to see the evolution of that, because I think it changes some things, not only on the offensive line, at running back, just all over the place. Defensive line, you're going to have to keep those guys fresher longer. And there's lessons learned this year from teams like Notre Dame, even from teams like Penn State. So I think that's the fascinating dynamic with a lot of these positions. But I feel pretty solid about Penn State's situation at right guard, at interior line altogether. And again, I'm going to go back to Dunk as Penn State's best offensive tackle when he's healthy. So I think he's going to stay at tackle.
Yeah. Thank you for addressing that. That's a situation that I think has come up a lot of. Now you're looking at, you're eyeballing all the different pieces, and there's been this revelation that Nolan Rucci can play football, and you would rather have 4 or 5 deep at tackle, which is something we've never said about a James Franklin football team. Nate, your thoughts here on the on this particular competition, or where you think it stands in terms of the importance. Too high, too low on the list?
I think it's important. I do think broadly, right, the idea of position flexibility and versatility is an extremely important thing to Phil Troutwine, and all of his players make that clear. I saw Javen Williams in the chat. He played guard for the Minnesota game. Right, there was a game in there towards in November, I want to say, maybe Purdue, where he was at left guard. So I do think that there is somewhat of a limiting mindset from the outside that does not take place on the inside. Right, if you're the Penn State football program and you're Phil Troutwine, you're looking at this as, a ton coming back, but also, I mean, there is a lot of time between now and August where they can put their brains together and figure out who fits where, and getting the 5 best players on the field all the time. And then if they can make those 5 8 and make those 8 10, that's what they'll do, right? They will try to see who's ready. And some of those guys that had promising, buzzy summers this past summer, who didn't necessarily make it into a lot of action this year, right? I don't put limitations on those things. Right. You can be surprised, right? Cooper Cousins, you know where he stands, and you know that he's going to be part of the conversation, and you know that he will be ready to play. But there's a lot more out there that isn't known in terms of guys that came to Penn State and developed quickly and impressed quickly. With a season under their belt, even if it's on D squad, being able to parlay that into a strong winter workout and spring practices and summer, you could see some challenges there, I think. Really throughout the offensive line.
So let's get to number 4.
Number 4.
I'm putting running back 3 here at our 4th position, because Penn State's receivers are what they are. And I think that that's an important situation. But when we talk about Andy Kotelnicki, the integration of his offense, and Penn State's depth at that position, this past season, they had 2 freshmen backing up 2 superstars. Those guys, they wanted to preserve their red shirts. They did that. Now they've got 4 running backs out of the gate. Cam Wallace, his health, I don't know where that's going. I don't know that situation. So we'll just put him in his own category. We'll call it the honorary Zariah Fisher category of could contribute, maybe. Don't know yet. And then you have Big Ten ready freshmen, Jabri Wallace-Coleman and Tyke Hayes from a physical size perspective. I want to be very clear that I'm not saying that they are ready to play in the Big Ten, but they are not coming in like a Corey Smith who's 180 pounds and needs time to physically develop. There's always refining that needs to happen. But from a pure size perspective, these guys are closer to being able to contribute. So let's just say, because Tyke Hayes is on campus right now and was there in December, that we're talking about 5 potential players to fill 3 roles. I think that is going to be an emphasis of this offense. We saw it at Kansas when Andy Kotelnicki had that many running backs. Now, Devin Neal was still the star in that situation. They got a 2-headed monster. They're going to play 2 running backs more often, and that means they need to have more depth there. That's my assessment and opinion about starting out of the gate here in January. That's where this offense is going to go. So running back 3 needs to be a player. And again, the competition for that spot is going to be pretty intense, and I think is going to be a positive development for Penn State in the offense next season. Overvalue or undervalue that, Nate?
I think over, only in the sense that, yeah, is there some intrigue there for the future? Absolutely. But is anybody not aware of Nick Singleton and Katron Allen being a massive focus of next year? You know what I mean? Like right. Yes, the third guy, that will be very competitive. And look, this is a reality of all of these situations that you have laid out here. None of this stuff's going to be decided before the middle of August.
I would say, somebody brought this up last week, with the soft schedule to start, they're going to push these competitions into September. Sure. Some people will have to start, but the rotation and the number of people that will be involved early in the year should be really high.
Yeah, I think that it is short-sighted, I would argue, to, is Cam Wallace going to be, is he going to slide back into number 3 right off the bat? No, probably not. But he did enough to earn that job.
Yeah.
Quentin Martin was a guy who had a lot of buzz and people were excited about. Corey Smith upended that. Corey did a lot of really good things himself to, at minimum, pull even. You could hear it in the way James Franklin talked about it. Corey is ahead of necessarily where they might have thought he was, and I think that there were some flashes there when you did see him in the game of capability and ability. So I just think that I always
He's got a good blend of positional skill, understanding how to play running back, and game-breaking ability. And that's hard to ignore when it's also been proven at late in games when the game is over and everyone's playing base offense. So that's the important part, because that the same conversation about Tony Rojas of excelling in garbage time versus excelling when the game plan is playing out are 2 separate things. And don't want to overestimate those, but at the same time, a position like running back, you got to feel good about what you saw about Corey Smith. Like, if you don't, that's crazy.
Yep. Yeah. So, look, you said, I think earlier, 5 guys for 3 spots. It's really 5 guys for 1 spot.
Right.
Ultimately, right?
Yes.
That's what you're looking at. Health, maintaining health, consistency, all of those things will be evaluated and be part of the process of how they refine that. I always err on the side of experience. Guys who have it helps. But at the same time, occasionally you get guys that are able to come in, step in and just blow you away. They're just, they're that good right off the bat. So it will definitely be an interesting thing to watch. I just try to keep in mind sometimes we get caught in a vacuum of finding intrigue that ignores the obvious.
The obvious. Sure.
And
that's why I started with 2 running backs is going to be a focal point of this offense. And so to build the resiliency in the roster, to play 2 running backs, regardless of what happens from a health perspective, is where we've had this conversation for a couple years now, starting with, well, if either of those guys get hurt, what happens to that percentage of your offense? And I've talked about this before. At Kansas, it's about 10% of the offense. So even in this situation, maybe it gets to 15% of the offense. It's going to be important, but it's also going to be about the totality of the health of the room and the depth of the room to be as aggressive as possible with the top two. And that, as you are correctly shining the light on that part, to make sure that we're not talking about the fact that the third running back is going to be like a starter and a star on the team. So,
I mean, they could become that, right? I mean, there is a post Katron, post Nick world that Penn State will have to confront at some point. It's not now.
Yeah. Right. So we'll see what you think of the lineup once we get through all of the top three. But here we are at
number 3.
I'm going to go with the field safety position. I think this is maybe the most interesting battle. Again, I have it a little bit lower because you should feel reasonably confident in Penn State's ability to play 3 quality safeties, but I don't know whether it's at 3 positions or at 2 positions. And the battle right now seems to be between King Mack transferring back into Penn State and Dejon Lane at field safety. So we're assuming Zakee Wheatley is going to take over for Jalen Reed, and then it's going to be a battle of those two with young talent and veteran-ish experience as an important part of the roster, which will help determine other positions in the defense once they get a defensive coordinator and once they understand the talent that they're working with at linebacker, nickel corner, and safety. So it is a position that is open. It is a starting role in the defense. It has to be higher than running back 3, but I still think that there are other positions that are more important on this particular rundown. What do you think of that battle and where we have it here on the list?
Yeah, I guess the first question is, and we've talked about this off the air, is Zakee's slide necessarily the best thing?
I don't see another option. I don't see another option on the roster. You could convince me King Mack or Dejon Lane could play the boundary position, but from an institutional perspective of how these things go, it's typically the oldest veteran player with the physical abilities to play that position. And in the game against Notre Dame, Wheatley took that role and played that so they could play Jalen Reed at the Lion for a large stretch of the game, and he played pretty well. So that's why I'm pretty much putting him in Penn. I don't see another player. Tyrese Mills moved on in the transfer portal, the only other veteran player. The other guys that are in contention, Dejon Lane could play probably 4 positions on the defense from a physical perspective. From a mental perspective, I don't know if that's true. I just don't know. I don't know that's true. And then King Mack has the physical ability to play that position despite being 5'9". He is a physical player and is a safety, having watched him play corner at Alabama. But again, the veteran institutional understanding and knowledge to play that position, which is where they seem to start building the defense. I don't know that there is another player that makes sense. Our resident expert on safeties is Sean Fitz. Fitz, what do you think of this conversation about the field safety position, the boundary safety, keeping Zakee Wheatley where he played in that Orange Bowl and moving forward as kind of the known part of the defense back there?
It was a great conversation, a wonderful conversation. Definitely heard all of it. No, I think you go with the continuity back there, and Wheatley, he does that job really well in terms of it fits his athleticism, it fits his length, it fits his ability to patrol center field, more than anything. And he's a heck of a football player. But I think if you moved him into the Jalen Reed role, probably wouldn't get the output that you get from Jalen Reed. So find a guy like Dejon Lane. I think you guys were talking about him pretty extensively, but find a guy like Dejon Lane that you can move around and you can play.
Where do you think he fits best? Because as I said earlier, I think he can play any of the 3 roles that potentially happen in the defense. But where do you think, from the mental perspective, the growth, being a sophomore, he fits to maximize his talent and hide any weaknesses he may have?
Yeah, I think he fits best in that sort of role that we envision for KJ Winston, in the sense of, hey, this guy can be a deep safety on a couple of downs and then, play up to the line of scrimmage. And I mean, it's so tough not seeing the fruits of the labor there, in terms of what this defense was, or what that defense was supposed to look like. So I think that you don't want to throw too much at him as a young player, but at the same time, he's more physically gifted than anybody back there. So, and I think that's might have been true even with the group that was there last year. So you're going to have options with him. I have a tough time getting him as a Sam or him as a hybrid guy out of my head, just because of his body type and the way that he's been able to close.
He's the perfect player for it.
He's perfect for that. Absolutely. I don't know if he can do it. We haven't seen it.
Yeah. The what I keep thinking is, even with Jalen Reed playing that position last year, there are deficiencies because so few players have a perfect skill set to play man coverage, the run, and zone all at the same time. I mean, Notre Dame was picking on Jalen Reed to a certain extent, running pick plays, interference plays, and asking him to play man coverage like Xavier Watts. You saw the difference between the two players, and it's no disrespect to Jalen Reed. There's just few safeties that can play that slot position and play and be a complete player and run the defense as if you had a slot corner and a linebacker out there. Everything is a choice. Everything is a decision. And Lane is the one guy that you have less choices to make if he can do all the roles from a mental perspective, I think, as opposed to the physical one. Coming here to the end of the show, want to get to our top two because those are the most important. So here's number two.
Number two.
So I'm explaining the rationale of why I have these here in the positions they are, and then these guys can pick it apart if they so choose. Number two, not number one, is wide receiver. Because I think there's a certain set of, but believe it or not, I think there's a firm expectation, at least as far as what I've seen of this particular group that's been assembled in the transfer portal and with the players on the roster. I feel like I have a firm understanding of where Kyron Hudson is going to play, where Devontae Ross is going to play, and where the rest of the players fit into this particular picture. I wrote about it at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, breaking each down. There are three receiver positions. So we just say wide receiver, but really there's the X, there's the Z, and there's the slot, which sometimes you call the H position. So there are guys that fit in multiple roles, but they have to play a role based on the other talent around them. And what we saw from Penn State and Andy Kolnicki last year and how he liked to use the talent he had last year. So it's not number one because I feel like there's at least an outline and a blueprint of what is going to happen. And those two transfers were brought in here for a reason, Nate. I think those guys, those are penciled in starters unless something drastically happens. And if they're not starters, oh boy, is there a problem.
I don't know. I think that there's a lot to learn about a healthy, and man, people are going to kill me for this. There's a lot to learn about a healthy Caden Saunders. There's a lot to learn.
I love that. Yeah.
Right. I think it's because there's been a lot to learn. That's the outside frustration and sentiment toward him specifically, is just this untapped or unrealized potential. But I think based on the conversation around him before he got hurt in the preseason, it was not necessarily high, but it was something. Right?
He'd be a contributor, right?
He was gonna play this year.
Yeah,
he's gonna play. So I got to see that. Ties here, Denmark. Want to see that? What does year two look like for him? Josiah Brown with a full year of injury recovery under his belt. Peter Gonzalez. Peter was going to play this year. I don't know about more than 4 games, but he was going to play.
He's my dark horse for a guy that it matters a lot in this conversation because of the size and what he can bring to the table from not just a physical perspective in sense of height, weight, speed, but also they don't have a lot of guys. Fitz, this has been my problem. You go back to the Taylor Stubblefield era of recruiting, and they're all the same. They're all 5'11", 5'10", 190 pounds max. None of these guys can play X from a classic perspective. And so you've got a lot of slot Zs. You got a lot of guys that can play to the field and not a lot of guys that can fill that role of get open and catch the damn ball. And so I don't know from a route running perspective if Peter Gonzalez is that guy. But I know from a size perspective, Hands might be something we need to learn more about, but there's just the aspects of his dad is a former NFL quarterback, and there's the NFL bloodlines there. He comes from Pittsburgh Central Catholic. The football raising is a guy that all the signs point to he's going to do the things off the field to contribute on the field, and it becomes just the translation of that to actually catching the football when it comes to you. And they don't have a lot of those guys on the roster. They have a lot of those guys that are slot receivers that are masquerading as guys that could play Z. So that aside, I guess, what do you think of where this is on the? Of course, I come to you right as you got a cough. What do you think of the competition at receiver and kind of the things we've outlined in terms of players at positions and what we know here in January?
Yeah, I would think Kyron Hudson would have to fill that X-ish role. Like
Yes.
That's kind of where you're at with that. You start with all the slot guys that you've got, and Saunders and Clifford and Denmark and all these guys, and you bringing in Devontae Ross as well. Like there's a lot heavily slot faded, I guess it would be. And then you move to Z, which is the next step in evolution physically, and they blend that line, and that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can have that. But then I agree. Yeah, you know, you're finding the X, and the X is almost turning into, dare I say, Luke Reynolds, like finding yourself in that 12 personnel gap again. So I think that's kind of where I'm at. Again, it's gonna be a long off season, man. That group needs more hypotheticals to come true or anything like that than any other position on the roster. And we're not going to sit here and tell you it's going to happen. I think Denmark is a guy that can make a dent. I think he's talented enough. I saw Greg in the chat earlier said that, you know, you have to figure out if he's anything but fast. It's the opposite. He's not fast. Like he's not a sprinter. He's not, he's probably a 4.6 guy in the 4.6s, which is fine. It's just a matter of him finding the space and him being the guy that can get in and out of breaks. And I think that guy, but that takes some of the feel. That takes some. I mean, he's not going to be Jeremiah Smith running straight pass guys. He's not that physical specimen. Yeah, that's why it didn't work for him in year one, in the sense that he couldn't break through in that rotation. He is tough. He has the ability to make those catches. But is he the guy that has the ability to make those catches and go for 6 for 128, or is he the guy that has those ability to make those catches and go for 8 for 70? You know, you just don't know what kind of addition he's going to bring to the broader sense of that room. So I think he can crack the rotation. I was talking to people this fall, and they said, yeah, it ain't happening this year, but it's going to come together. He's going to be in that rotation in 2025. So I think he'll be fine there. It's just, how do you work around that? Because he's a slot guy, and Saunders is a slot guy, and Ross, you're bringing in a guy to be a slot. So, I mean, they're high on these transfers, absolutely. But, you know, the skeptical part of your brain after watching Penn State's receivers the last couple of years is going to say, oh, we're going to need to see it to believe it. And, you know, again, we're just not going to sit here and tell you it's going to happen and drive up that hopium to make that this unit a capable unit. I mean, it's not even a star unit. It's got to be a capable unit. So that's kind of where I'm at with receivers. And, you know, I just ruined the show. So I apologize for that.
Well, let's get to we're here at the final. We need the payoff of the number one spot, that unseeded wide receiver.
Number 1.
I think the three of us kind of have a general sense of the player that needs to play this position in an ideal world, but middle linebacker, right now, there's no clear candidate for the position. Why it's number one. This is going to be the number one thing that decides the other three positions. And I wrote about this, you know, when I broke down all the position battles for the defense in 2025. Who plays Mike? And then what are the offshoots of that? Because Kobe King leaving and there being a lot of young. Let me set the criteria. Penn State generally wants a veteran player at that position that understands the defense. And I know there's no defense right now, but generally understands defense. And then from there, a guy that can execute the role from the physical perspective of, you know, being a 3-down player. That part is secondary to, can you get everyone lined up? Can you communicate? Can you run the show? And so there's a scant number of veteran linebackers out there. And the one that we have highlighted here in the graphic is Tony Rojas, who I really want him to stay at will. I think that that's his best position. He can play Mike, and I understand the people that are going to be shouting out there that I'm shilling for Tony Rojas again. The dude was playing injured all season long, and there's more to learn and there's more to see about the physical side of his game. As a guy that was a high-end running back in high school and a guy that showed early in his career a willingness to take on contact. So I'm not worried about him executing the position. I just think the best position for him for impact is that will position. So I don't see a guy on the roster right now that makes you feel like, okay, that's the answer. Nate, what do you know about what I just said and how you feel about this competition that's lining up for 2025?
I know that there was devastation that Keon Wiley got hurt last spring.
Yeah.
Right. At a position that was in a position group that was already thin. He's a starter. If he is healthy and if he gets to where he needs to be. Look, this isn't like me pulling the curtains back. Just look around. Look at how his teammates talk about him. Look at his career trajectory. He was a guy who played early, was a potential burned red shirt, I believe, that true freshman year. He's been in the program, and I don't think but like this was the year. This was the year for him before he got hurt, where he would have been a real piece of this defense. And so just because that went away for the year, out of sight, out of mind, doesn't mean he's not still heavily in the plans for Penn State and what they do. Like, I don't think Penn State feels the way about this that everybody else does.
Gotcha.
Because I think that they see him as a legitimate, viable, all the stuff that you just talked about knowing the defense, being able to run the show, all of those things. I guess you could make an argument of having not done it in games necessarily, but he's been there the whole time. Like, he's a smart guy. He's very highly thought of. Put it that way.
Yeah. So Mech Engineer says this in the chat, Fitz. He says Wiley isn't big enough to play Mike. So there's two things that I want to address, and then I want to throw it to you. First off, 248-pound Kobe King is an anomaly in modern football. Most linebackers are not 250 anymore. So the fact that Penn State had two linebackers in 2023 that were 250 was wild. And then secondly, he's a guy that Penn State has experimented with, to my understanding, also on the edge in terms of like maybe a situational pass rusher. So size isn't just about weight. What do you think of him playing Mike or the versatile chess piece to fill in problem areas? It seems like in a couple of different positions in the front seven. What's your view? Because the part where we started with this is I think all three of us identify Keon Wiley as a guy that can make all this right. Is he a guy that can make all this right?
Well, first off, I think there's a couple things at play here, as usual. And I always go that direction. It's a disclaimer that I don't even need to say anymore. But first off, the new defensive coordinator who's ever calling the plays needs to find the guy that he trusts the most and go with that. Because when you talk Mike, this is not a 4-3 where your Mike plays straight over the center and you find yourself just like in traffic all the time. This is basically that old nickel alignment where you're playing two box linebackers and your Mike and your Will. Not that different. Like, this is not a situation where one plays in the middle and one plays on the outside. This is a situation where you have two box linebackers that blur that line as much as possible, which is why I think Tony Rojas is going to be that guy. Because he's been around, he's been through the defense. He's got to be able to take that next step and make the calls. I mean, the bad part here is you had Kobe and Tyler Elston as your green dot guys, but they're both out of the program now. So you got to bring that one in now. That's going to be tough. Which is probably why you see more, more rotation in the spring. I think if that makes sense.
Yep.
Wiley, I think, to me, is a will. They're going to play him at will. They're going to use him as more of a blurred line guy in the sense that he can get after the quarterback with nobody else in that room. Like, it's pretty special the way that he's been able to come off the edge in the limited amount that we've seen, plus a lot that we've heard from practice. As Nate said, they love this guy. Like, they were devastated when he went down. Did not ring. It did not have the ripples on the outside until we started getting more of that feedback and like, oh, this is going to make a difference for 2024. And it did. But no, I think you find yourself with a couple of options there. Is Tamir Robinson to be a viable candidate there needs to make a big step. Like, it needs to process faster, and he needs to get his body moving before it starts processing, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Whereas, a guy like Specca, Anthony Specca's got some natural feel there. And I think those guys get a lot of reps in the spring, and I can't sit here and tell you who it's going to be or who's going to slot higher. But there's value in knowing where you're going and then eventually getting there versus going there and then finding out you're in the wrong spot. So I'm very curious how that's going to go. There's a couple other guys in that room that can, maybe make some strides, but I think you're kind of looking at the cards and saying, this is what you got right now. And Tony Rojas is going to be that chip that you need him to be the veteran guy now. I mean, we don't think about him like that because he's been, such a prospect for a long time, but he's going to have to be the guy that I think shoulders the most of this load.
Yeah. So our top, Nate, go for it.
I was just going to say, Fitz, am I misremembering Keon being at Mike?
He was at Sam when he got hurt, I believe. He was everywhere. But I'm saying he has spent time at Mike. He spent time at all three. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But he got hurt a couple practices in the spring, so we didn't see a ton of him. But yeah, he's a guy cross training because not just of his ability to soak that in, ability to play, because he's a heck of a football player and a heck of a smart football player, but also because of his effectiveness as a pass rusher. That's why I think he ends up at will.
Yeah, and the good news is you can blitz any linebacker you want, and you can bring that from a lot of different locations. And you lose Abdul Carter, but doesn't mean you have to lose the ability to blitz linebackers and be effective.
Well, going back to that, how many times do we see if you took a snapshot of Penn State's defense and Kobe King and Tony Rojas are on the field, Tony Rojas is over the center as much, maybe not, if not more, but he's closer to the center than Kobe. So you're thinking, okay, maybe he's playing a little bit of Mike. That's not the conversation. This is not a video game 4-3 linebacker where your linebacker's right lined up in the middle of the field and he can go anywhere. This is a different type of style defense, and that's the way that they've coached it, and that's the way they've been really successful with it. As a whole defense, the linebacker play I think needed to be better this year, but those are conversations that we had all season. It's no use rehashing them.
So we will rehash quickly here. The top 5 position battles for 2025: right guard, third running back, field safety, wide receiver, and Mike linebacker. We are out of time, so these guys can't tell me whether that's right or wrong. So that's going to be the end of the show today. Thank you to Fitz and to Nate for coming on. And everyone is playing injured right about now as Fitz lines up a nice solid cough here to end the show. Appreciate you guys. We will be back tomorrow. 10 a.m. BWI Live. Myself and Greg Pickle are going to talk about something at this point in Penn State football. There's always more to discuss. There's always more to break down. And then recruiting, junior days, the guys you need to know for the next wave of Penn State football players. Somebody in the chat earlier today said, does Penn State need to fire their wide receivers coach? If you look at the class of 2026, the receivers, it's pretty good. Pretty good. We'll discuss that later in the week. For Sean Fitz and Nate Bauer, I'm Thomas Frank Carr. We'll talk to you then.